it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Immigration Q&A session. Today, we are joined by recent graduates and international students from institutions all across Canada and internationally. My name is Han, and I will be moderating our session tonight. First, a few housekeeping items to go over just to make sure everything is going to go as smoothly as possible. So all participants have been muted. There's no need to use video, and you should be able to hear via your computer device. The session is currently being recorded, and at the end of the session, we'll be sending you a quick poll. So please kindly take a second to send your feedback, as we're always looking to improve. As well, if you have any questions, please make sure to post your questions in the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function. That's where it will be directed, and that's where we will be monitoring and also ensuring that we answer those questions. On another note, with questions, if there are specific questions related to your specific current situation, we may be able to answer that, maybe the question in general, but if you're looking for an answer to that specific question, please make sure to send Ziah an email, and if you can go ahead and ask for a consultation to get those questions answered. But we're going to be doing our best to make sure that we answer everyone's questions to the best of our abilities. The other thing I wanted to note is that if you're interested in future Devant sessions, please go to our website, devant.ca /all events, and that's where you'll see upcoming sessions. So please make sure to go there and check out upcoming sessions. A little bit of Devant before we get started. Devant is a subsidiary of Academical Group, and Academical Group is it actually has been around for over 20 years. They are the largest company providing research and consulting expertise to colleges and universities across Canada. They focus on student recruitment, student success, and career development. So Academica Group started Devant because they saw the challenges and opportunities that international students and recent graduates have when they're looking to establish a career in Canada. So Devant quite literally means in French, in front of. And so we believe that our services and support will bring you in front of the rest of your journey to stay, work, and succeed in Canada. So Devant is an organization tailored specifically to international students. And we have the expertise of over 60 years of in higher education and career development. So Devant is entirely set up to provide assistance to international students like yourselves. Again, my name is Han, and I will be your moderator today. I do want to introduce to you Ziah. She is our guest speaker, our panelist. She is a barrister, solicitor, and partner at Long & Mungelgee Group. She is an active member of Canada's legal and immigration communities. She has argued in the federal court, the Immigration Refugee Board of Canada. She's also an executive committee member of the Citizenship and Immigration section of the Ontario Bar Association. She's volunteered countless areas, and she's volunteered for the Organization for Refugee, Asylum, and Migration in San Francisco. Ziah received her Bachelor's of Art degree in business law with highest honors from Carleton University. She graduated with a Juris Doctor law degree from University of Ottawa. So welcome, Ziah. This is going to be a very interesting session tonight. We have a lot of people in the audience, and so welcome. I'll pass the floor on to you.
Thanks so much, Han, and welcome to everyone who's here tonight. It's great to be back. I'm going to jump right in because I know we have a lot of material to cover, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. So I'm going to just jump right into it. In terms of immigration, I want to start talking about temporary residence, and then we'll talk about permanent residence. When we talk about temporary residence, for those of you who are here in Canada right now, either you have your study permits or you're already on your postgrad work permits, it's really important to make sure that you keep your status in Canada, okay? What that means is that while you're here, you want to ensure that you always do have a valid permit or valid status. Now, if you find that your permit, let's say you're here studying right now and you realize that your study permit is going to be expiring before you've actually completed your program, what you need to do is apply to extend your study permit. Okay, that needs to be done prior to the expiry of your current permit. So before the expiry date that's listed on your current study permit, it's really important to submit an extension application. As long as you submit your extension application properly, you'll have what's called implied or maintained status. What this means is that you're actually able to continue studying in Canada if you're here on a study permit, or working if you have a work permit, while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So it means that, you can be here, you can continue doing what you were doing while you're waiting for IRCC to process your extension. But that only happens, that implied status only happens if you submit your application properly and before the expiry date that's listed on your permit. Now, a question I get often is that IRCC's website says your extension applications need to be submitted 30 days prior to the expiry date. That's great if you can, right? It's wonderful if you're ahead of the game and you have that extension application submitted a month in advance, but that's not the law. The law is that you have to submit your extension applications prior to the expiry. So as long as it's done before that expiry date, you're able to continue working or studying in Canada while you wait for that extension application. Now, what happens if you submit the extension application and your application's refused, or you simply miss that deadline? For whatever reason, things happen and you realize that that expiry date has passed and unfortunately you forgot to submit your extension application. Well, you have one more opportunity. You can apply to do what's called a restoration. So you can apply to restore your status, which means get your status back. However, there's a very strict timeline for this. The restoration timeline is that you have 90 days from when you lost your status. So if you forgot to extend your status, you have 90 days from the expiry date that's listed on your permit. If you get a refusal letter for your extension application, you have 90 days to restore from that refusal decision. But really important to make sure that you do submit the restoration application so that you can get your status back. Now, the biggest difference between being on maintained implied status versus having a restoration application in place is that while you're waiting for a decision on the restoration application, you can't work or study in Canada. And so this is a huge difference, right? I mean, when we talk about being on an or having submitted an extension application, one of the benefits is that as long as you remain in Canada, you can continue working or studying. That does not apply if you've applied for restoration. You do have to stop and wait until you get a decision on that restoration application before you're able to resume studying or working. Now, the expiry date that's listed on your study permit, that's obvious, right? It's listed right there. We all see it, so we all know that that expiry date is there. There's actually other conditions that are not as obvious. They're implied on you. You're expected to know them, but they're not physically listed on the study permit, for example. For those of you who are here studying right now, one of those conditions is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. What that means is that while you're here on a study permit, you do always have to be making progress towards the completion of your program. If for whatever reason you stop studying, whether it's that you finish your program early or you decide that you no longer want to study in the program, the validity of your study permit actually ends. So your study permit becomes invalid 90 days from when you stop studying. And so that means you actually lose your status. Of course, the exception to that is if your study permit expiry date is before the 90-day mark, then it will be the earlier of the two. But otherwise, assuming that you have a study permit that's valid for, let's say, another year, for example, well, you don't have status in Canada as a student for that full year. Once you stop studying, you have a 90-day window to change your status because that study permit does become invalid. There are two exceptions to that. The first is if you're on a regularly scheduled break. Now, when we talk about a regularly scheduled break, what that means is we look at the academic calendar for your program at your particular school. And so what IRCC defers to is to, like I said, to your school, and they look to say, okay, what is meant to be a break from studies for your program at your school? And so it's not one that you decide to take on your own. It has to be one that's part of the academic calendar for your program. The second exception to the requirement to be actively pursuing studies is if you're on an authorized leave. Life happens, things come up, sometimes you do need to take time off school. It could be for medical reasons, for family reasons, whatever it may be. There are provisions for you to take a leave from your studies. But with that being said, you do need to let the school know, and it does need to be approved by the school. My recommendation, if you do decide to take an authorized leave, is to get that authorized leave in writing from the school so that you can use that as proof later on if you have to apply for an extension or when you're applying for your postgrad work permit, for example. But really important, the only two exceptions for the requirement to be actively pursuing studies is either you're on a scheduled break or you're on an authorized leave. Many of you probably already know this. Your study permit does allow you to work while you're studying. And so this is a huge benefit for international students who are here. Now, the requirement is that you can only work while you're a full-time student. So you do need to be enrolled full-time in your program in order to be able to use your study permit to work in Canada. With that being said, the exception to that, because there's always exceptions, the exception to that rule is if you're in your final semester and you no longer require a full course load in order to complete your program. So if in your final semester, you've basically only need a course or two courses, and so you're going to become a part-time student, that doesn't affect your ability to work. You can still use your study permit to work the same way you could before, even though you're a part-time student and you're not a full-time student. Now, while you are studying here in Canada, there are restrictions in terms of how much you can use your study permit to work off campus. So during the school year, you can work up to 20 hours a week off campus using your study permit, and you can work full-time during any regularly scheduled break. With that being said, right now, IRCC does have a temporary policy in place, which actually removes that 20-hour restriction when we're talking about during the school year. So for any of you who hold a study permit that either you had applied for or was approved before October 7th of 2022, and you're still using that same study permit today, you're actually able to work beyond the 20 hours a week during the school year up until the end of this year. So up until December 31st of this year, that 20-hour cap does not apply. If you are on a study permit that you applied for, that you applied for after October 7th of 2022, this temporary policy does not apply to you. So really important to go back and think about, okay, when did I apply for, when did I get my study permit that I'm currently using right now? And that helps you determine whether or not you can use your study permit to work beyond the 20 hours. Now, like I said earlier, the requirement in terms of being able to use your study permit to work off campus is that you are a full-time student. And so related to that, once you've completed your program and you're therefore no longer a student, you do have to stop working. Now, when we talk about completing your program, IRCC is looking for basically the earliest point in time where you've received any written confirmation from the school that you've met the requirements of your program. So this can be something as simple as an email from the school. It can be your final grades being released. It can be a letter from the school. It's really anything that indicates to you that you have met the requirements of your program. As soon as you've received that, your study permit no longer allows you to work in Canada, and you do need to stop working immediately. I often get clients that'll come and say, well, you know, I just didn't check my grades, so then I never really was informed that I completed my program. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. Once the grades are released, you are expected to have checked them. And so at that point, you are still, whether or not you decide to go online and actually look at them, if you had finished your program, at that point, you do need to stop working. Now, for those of you who may be continuing your studies, maybe you finished your first program, but you're thinking about, or you will be doing a second program, you can work in between programs as long as the length of time between the end of your first program and the start of your second program is less than 150 days. You do have to have already been accepted in that second program, and you do still need to have a study permit or be on implied status in order to be able to work. For those of you who are not going on to do another program, of course, then the next step is applying for your postgrad work permit, which is very exciting. But you should also think about the application and whether it makes sense for you and what that timing of when you apply makes the most sense. The reason I say that is because the postgrad work permit is like a unicorn. You're really only able to qualify for it once in your lifetime. So you can only obtain one postgrad work permit. And so you do want to make sure that you're using the time on that postgrad work permit to your advantage so that you're able to work in Canada, get the work experience you need, and apply for permanent residence, assuming that that is your end goal. The postgrad work permit, what you need to think about is that the length of it is going to coincide with the length of the program that you've completed here. So if you've studied in a program that's anywhere between 8 months to 2 years, then your postgrad work permit will also be valid for that same period of time. So what I mean by that is if you complete a 1-year program here in Canada, then you'll be eligible for a 1-year postgrad work permit. Now, if you do a program that's 2 years or longer, then you're eligible for the maximum duration of postgrad work permit, which is 3 years. Some of you may be doing multiple programs. You can combine the length of those programs together to meet the 2-year requirement so that you're eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit. So what I mean by that is if you do 2 1-year programs, for example, then your total education here in Canada is 2 years. You can combine those together and apply for a 3-year postgrad work permit. Now, really important, this is one that I see a lot of people not know in advance, but it does affect your eligibility. With the postgrad work permit, one of the main eligibility criteria, aside from having completed a program, is that throughout the program, you must have maintained full-time student status in each semester of your program. So IRCC is really looking to say, were you a full-time student in every semester of your programs of study here in Canada? And that is really, really important because the eligibility criteria specifically state that you do have to keep that full-time student status. As soon as you become a part-time student in any semester, you can still apply for the postgrad work permit, but what ends up happening is that you're running the risk of having it refused because you did not maintain that full-time student status. Now, the exceptions to the rule of, or to the requirement of needing to be a full-time student is if you're on an authorized leave or if you're in your final semester. So again, like we talked about before, if you're in your final semester and you don't need a full-time course load, then that's fine. You can be a part-time student in that last semester and still maintain eligibility for the postgrad work permit. Now, this question comes up a lot in terms of, students who may have something that requires them to take some time off, or they feel that, I can't take on a full-time course load. I need to reduce the work that I'm doing right now in order to be able to address this other thing that's happening in my life, and that's completely normal. However, when we're talking about it from an immigration point of view, sometimes it makes more sense to not decrease the course load to a part-time course load, but instead to take an authorized leave so that you're able to ensure when you get to the stage of applying for the postgrad work permit, that time that you needed off does not affect your ability to qualify and apply for the work permit. When we were talking earlier about working on your study permit, we said that you can continue working as long as you're a full-time student. Now, as soon as you receive confirmation from the school that you have completed your program, like we said earlier, it does mean that you need to stop working. However, as soon as you have applied for your post-grad work permit, you can actually start working full-time, as long as you have a valid study permit on the day of your post-grad work permit application, and you have valid status here in Canada. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you have a study permit that was going to expire early and so you submit an extension application, but you're currently on maintained status at the time of your post-grad work permit application, well, then you do not have the ability to work full-time while you're waiting for a decision on the post-grad application. You actually have to wait until you get a decision, until you get that post-grad work permit before you're able to start working. So it does make a huge difference because, I mean, right now we know that the processing times currently for in Canada work permits are around 5 months. So if you were on maintained status at the time that you submit your post-grad work permit application, then you would not be able to start working until you've received the post-grad, and that can take about 5 months right now. The other thing to note with the post-grad work permit, and I started talking about this earlier, is timing, right? Because you want to think about when exactly you've completed your program. Do you need to start working immediately because you have that ability to start working as soon as you've applied for your post-grad work permit, or do you need to time it in terms of submitting them a little bit later so you have more time in Canada? It is a very strategic question and is one to think about when you're looking at submitting the work permit application. The other thing I do want to point out is that IRCC's website, when it looks at the eligibility and the process of applying for the post-grad work permit, it says that you need to apply for the post-grad work permit within 180 days so that you have a 180-day window to submit the application for the work permit. Yes, you do have 180 days overall, but with that being said, you have to also think about it in conjunction with the fact that your status on your study permit does end 90 days following the completion of your program, or the expiry date on your study permit, whatever is earlier. And so while, yes, IRCC's website says you do have 180 days, it's almost better to think about it that you have 90 days or the earlier of the expiry date on your study permit, whichever is coming first, to apply for the post-grad work permit. If you're applying after the 90-day mark, then not only are you looking, and you're still in Canada, then not only are you probably looking to file that post-grad application, you're probably going to need to file a restoration application because your status will have ended. So important to think about timing as well when you're submitting the post-grad work permit application. Okay. What I want to look at next are options for permanent residence. So when we talk about applying for permanent residence, there's different ways to apply. We have federal programs and we have provincial programs. When we look at the federal programs, the main types of programs that people really talk about are the federal skilled worker and the Canadian experience class programs. Now, the biggest difference between these two, and I'm not going through all of the criteria, the eligibility criteria in either of them, but when we compare these two programs, the main difference between them is where you've completed your work experience. So with the federal skilled worker program, you do need to have at least 1 year of continuous high skilled work experience in a single occupation within the past 10 years. However, that work experience can be anywhere in the world. It can be obtained while you're a student. It can be self-employed work experience. So in that sense, there's a greater variety of roles that can fall under that can meet the criteria for the federal skilled worker. Comparatively, when we're talking about Canadian experience class, you need 1 year of high skilled work experience in Canada that you've obtained while you're not a student and not self-employed. So that means that you do need to be an employee in order to use that work experience for Canadian Experience class. Now, when we look at the general process for international students, this is where thinking about how to apply and the timing of your application is very important. Because when you finish your program of study, you can apply for the postgrad work permit. As soon as you've submitted the postgrad work permit application, assuming that you are eligible to work in Canada, you can start getting the work experience and start getting that year of experience to qualify under the Canadian Experience class. So again, thinking about strategy in terms of when you're applying and what position you have lined up for qualifying you under a Canadian Experience class. Now, regardless of which program, whether it's Federal Skilled Worker, whether it's the Canadian Experience class, the process of applying through either of these, and also the Federal Skilled Trades program, which we haven't talked about today, but the process of applying for any of these three programs is through the Express Entry system. So Express Entry is not a program in itself. It's really the management system for the federal programs. And the way it works is that you first create a profile, you go into a pool of applicants, and in that pool system, you're given a score out of 1,200. That score is then used to rank you against everyone else in the pool. And then what IRCC does is they go into the pool and they do a draw. So they'll go in and say, okay, today we're going to pick the top 4,000 people, for example, and they'll go from the highest scoring individual to the 4,000th. They'll set a minimum score, and everyone above that minimum score gets what's called an invitation to apply. Now, what's really important to understand is that creating a profile, going into a pool of candidates, that is not an application for permanent residence. Basically, at that point, you're telling IRCC that you're interested in becoming a permanent resident, but you haven't actually applied for PR just yet. You need to actually get your invitation in order to be able to actually prepare and submit your PR application. So, when you're thinking about, okay, does Express Entry work for me? Is this the best route? You're really thinking about, okay, what's my score going to be in the pool? And is that going to make me competitive? Now, with that being said, IRCC has already talked about making some changes to the way that they do draws this year. So far, all we've seen is that draws are based on points. They may be based on the program you qualify under, whether it's Canadian Experience class, provincial nominee, or whether it's a general draw. But IRCC is now talking about also doing occupation-specific draws. Now, we don't have a date. We don't know exactly when this year it's going to come into play or when they're going to start doing draws based on occupations. But that is something else that we may see happen in 2023. That could be a big change, right? Because then we're not just looking at your CRS points. We're also thinking about, okay, what occupations is IRCC drawing in terms of favoring, and does that change the way that people look at going into the pool? At this point, because there's nothing further, it may make sense to still have a profile going into the pool and seeing what happens, but keep an eye out to see when further information about the changes to the draws do happen. In terms of provincial programs, every province is a little different. So basically what IRCC has done is said to provinces, okay, provinces, you can create programs to help facilitate permanent residence in your specific regions. And so every province is a little different in terms of eligibility criteria, the streams, the processes. Every province has their own routes to getting to basically selecting candidates and providing the nomination certificates. Now, what you do need to know, though, is any province that you're applying through, you do have to have an intent to live and work in that province. And that's really important because the whole crux of the application, what provinces are looking for, is to increase the immigration and to increase the labor force and workforce in their particular areas. And so, they one of the main things that they're looking at, aside, of course, from eligibility and their actual programs, is do you have an intent to live and work in that province? Now, in terms of the different streams, like I said, every province is a little different in terms of criteria and the process, but generally you can think about it as streams that work with express entry and those that are outside of express entry. And this is a very important distinction because it does affect the way that you're actually applying for PR. So if you're applying for a program a provincial program that works with express entry, what that means that you're doing is you're applying to the province, and when they approve your application and you get your nomination certificate, you're actually also getting 600 points in your express entry profile. So it does mean that you do have to qualify for express entry. You do need to have a profile, and all of that has to happen first before you're applying to the province. But then after you've applied to the province and they've approved it, you're getting 600 additional points in your profile. And basically that means that you're going to the top of the pool, which means it's very likely that you would get an invitation in the next express entry draw. Once you have an invitation for permanent residence, it follows the exact same process we talked about earlier. And so you're looking at preparing and submitting your PR application through that express entry system. Comparatively, if you're applying through a non-express entry stream, then you're going through, you're applying to the province, you're getting your nomination, but your PR application is submitted through a very different portal than the express entry portal. And the consequence of that, the biggest thing that you need to keep in mind is that the processing time is very different. So with express entry, you'll see that IRCC says right now that their goal is to get back to their 6-month processing time for PR applications. However, when you're looking at the non-express entry routes, the processing time can be closer to 2 years. So huge difference between the two, and it is really important to know which program or what type of program you're applying through. If you've gotten a nomination through a non-express entry stream, you can't just go and convert that and say, okay, well, now I want to use it to get 600 points in express entry. It doesn't qualify for those additional 600 points, and you do have to use that nomination to then apply for PR through the other programs. So really important to keep in mind and to think about, okay, what program am I applying through and how does that all work? I'm not going to go through all the specific provincial programs, but like I said, it is really important to take a look at them because every province is a little different in terms of the processes, the programs, the criteria. Generally, every province does have a route for someone with a job offer. So if you do have an employer that's willing to support your application, it does always help to take a look at that provincial nominee program and see if that's another route to keep in mind for your permanent residence. In terms of next steps, in terms of things to think about when you're going through this process, one of the biggest tips I have is it is really important to have a plan, have an immigration plan. Coming to webinars like this is a great starting point, but you can see it's at it's very high level, right? It's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of everything that you need to know and really for you to actually decide, okay, how do I apply? What do I need to do? What's the best route for me? I think it is really important to sit down with an immigration lawyer who can go through your background and really determine what the best routes are for you to get your permanent residence. And with that, know what the steps are to get there, whether that's working on language or getting a particular type of job offer. All of these steps are important for you to know in advance so that you are using your time here in Canada appropriately. Like if you're here on a postgrad work permit, you want to make sure that you are using that time to your advantage so that you are able to get your PR before your permits do expire. And then the last thing is, we talked about this right from the beginning, make sure that while you're here in Canada, stay in status, right? It is really important. It does make it a lot more difficult if you lose your status to try and get it back, and then to apply for your permanent residence, if that's the end goal. With that, I know that was a lot of information. I see that there's quite a few questions coming in. So I'll open it up and start with the questions.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for putting your questions in the Q&A session. We're gonna go through it all, but I do want to perhaps give the questions that were emailed in advance. So Ziah, first question: is there a good time to in the year to apply for a permanent residence? For your PR, and how long do you need to have worked full time before you can apply for your PR? So two questions.
Sure. So with the first one, is there a better time to apply? Not necessarily. I mean, it really does depend on what program you're applying through, because some programs do have caps in terms of how many applications they'll accept. So for example, if you are applying through the home childcare provider program, that program generally opens and closes on January 1st. And so, of course, in that case, yes, there would be a date where you need to submit your application. But if you're looking at applying through something like Canadian Experience class using the Express Entry system, then right now, not necessarily. I mean, the system is open all year round, and so you can go into it at any point in time. In terms of the minimum work requirements, again, it does depend on the program that you're applying through. Every program's a little different in terms of what the work experience requirements are. If you're thinking about applying through Canadian Experience class, then you need a year of high-skilled work experience in Canada that you've obtained while you're not a student. Comparatively, if you're looking at some of the provincial programs, you may not need any work experience. So in Ontario, for example, we have the non-express entry route that it's under the employer job offer international student stream. It's for students who have completed an eligible program here in Ontario. That particular stream does not have a work experience requirement. And so as soon as you finish your program and you have a permanent full-time job offer, you may be eligible to apply for permanent residence.
Just a quick note for everyone in the audience. If your questions are specific to your specific journey, please make sure that you send Ziah an email, because what we're trying to do right now is, like Ziah said, a high level overview so that it applies, information is for as many people in the audience as possible. Next question from an email, Ziah, is regarding getting a job in Canada while being overseas, in this person's case, India. I have a relative who wants to come to Canada on a work permit. What's the best way to get this? He is 45 years old. I heard that there's an age restriction for a work permit. Is that true? If he's not eligible for a work permit, what are the other options?
Yeah, so there is no age restriction for a work permit. I mean, technically at any point in time, as long as you're eligible, you have a route to applying for the work permit, you are able to apply for it. With that being said, in terms of the best option or the route that really applies to this particular individual, my recommendation would be to schedule a consultation appointment, because that is very particular. So what I would recommend is reach out to us, schedule a consultation appointment, and during that consultation would be able to go through your background or go through this relative's background and identify what the options are for them.
And I think we have something very similar that's very unique. So this person is asking about the immigration process. They currently have their postgraduate work permit and got an extension. Already completed 1 year work experience with a NOC B here in Canada. Despite that, her score, as per the IRCC calculator, is less than 460. So is there a way for her to get permanent residency? What can be done to give this person an edge in the PR application?
Yeah. So definitely during the consultation, we go through what your CRS score looks like, so what your points would be in the express entry pool. And we look to see, is there any area where you can potentially improve your score? A big one is language. I mean, of course, we look at what your language test results are and see, is there any room for improvement in terms of retaking that test and potentially scoring higher to put you in a better position for your express entry profile. Now, with that being said, going through express entry, going through the CRS system is not the best route for everyone. When we look at the point system, unfortunately, it does really put a high value on age, right? And so anyone between or under 30 is really getting the majority of the points for, or getting the most points for age. Whereas once you turn 30, unfortunately, it no longer becomes a happy birthday because every year you're actually losing points in your express entry profile. Up until 45, when you're getting no points anymore for age. And of course, that makes a huge difference. So generally, where we have someone who is on the older end, we would look at seeing, okay, what are the other options? Because express entry just might not be the route for you. So again, this is what we do during a consultation. We would go through your background, look at your current points, look at where you are in the pool or what you could be in at the pool, and whether that makes the most sense or whether we want to look at a different option for permanent residence.
Okay, fantastic. Another question. I'm a graduate student. I do not have a job yet, but my husband does. When is the best moment to process my husband's SOWP, so spouse open work permit, in order that he does not stop working? At the moment, I apply for my postgraduate work permit or until I have a job.
Yeah, so for the special open work permit, where you're applying for special open work permit based on your postgrad work permit, one of the requirements is that you are working. Now, it used to be that you had to be working in a high skilled position. That's no longer the case. You just need to have a job in order for your spouse to qualify for an open spousal work permit. And so again, this goes back to strategy and sitting down with clients and really looking and saying, okay, when do you qualify? What do you need to do to qualify? And what's that best point in time to submit the extension application?
Sorry, Zia, we have so many questions. I'm just going to plow them.
Yeah, let's do it.
See how many questions we can go. Okay, another question. I wonder if it's possible to go to Ottawa in person to apply and get my visitor visa quicker. Is in person quicker?
It's not possible to apply in person. So that's an easy one.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. I'm an international student and I have a dependent who is of working age, but is in secondary school and wishes to get a summer job. How do I go about getting a work permit for them to do that?
Yeah, this is a great question. Actually, IRCC has recently, and just, for the first time since I've started working in immigration, actually now has a provision for dependent children who are legally able to work in Canada to get a work permit. So there is actually a work permit right now that they can use, that they can apply for dependent children to be able to work in Canada.
Okay, good news for that person then. Fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Next question. I'm from India and was born in 1988, 35 years old. Do I need a birth certificate while applying for permanent residence?
It depends on the program that you're applying through. So certain programs do require birth certificates, other programs do not. So it just depends on the route that you're applying for permanent residence.
Okay, so it depends. Next question. I applied for my work permit, but I am not on applied status yet. So can I work full-time before coming to applied status?
So if you've submitted your postgrad work permit application and you hold a study permit, a valid study permit on the date of your postgrad work permit application, then yes, you are able to work full-time while you're waiting for a decision on the postgrad application.
Right, okay. I think that's probably what they meant. Hi, I would like to know, since my college is not approved for postgraduate work permit, is there any other way to extend my visa here in Canada? I am living in Vancouver.
Again, in this case, we would want to schedule a consultation to look at what your options are.
Okay, consultation for this person. And next one, I would like to know regarding getting a job in Canada. Oh, this one was answered.
This is the one you got as an email as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, I like those easy ones. I recently graduated and would like to apply for a postgraduate work permit and extend my spouse's open work permit who is in Canada. According to the new rules, I need a job classified as NOC B. Can I apply for both permits by submitting a job offer letter, or do I have to wait for pay stubs before applying so that his visa gets extended?
Yeah, so again, with the postgrad work permit application, you do not need to have a job for yourself if you're applying just for your postgrad work permit application. If you are submitting your spouse's open spousal work permit, then you do need to have a job. It used to be that you needed to have a high skilled position. That is no longer the case. You can apply with any job.
And I guess is proof a letter or pay stubs to say if you
so IRCC, when you look at their instructions, they are looking for pay stubs at the same time. Now, it's not always going to be possible in certain situations. It all just depend on when you are submitting your application, what the expiry dates of your permits. So I think it really just comes down to what you can submit with your application. And if there's something that you're not able to, then looking and trying to update your application after to make sure that you are able to add it in.
Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity. How can one tackle an instance where IRCC approves a postgraduate work permit, but doesn't approve the spouse's open work permit, meaning the application is still in review after 4 months of the postgraduate work permit approval?
Yeah, this is a tough one because it really does depend on why the spousal open work permit is not being decided. Is there further documents that have been requested? Is there anything that's of concern in the application? So we would want to review that first to see if there's anything in particular that needs to potentially be updated or needs to be clarified in the application. Otherwise, following up with IRCC by web form would be another route to looking to see, okay, is there a way to get an update on this?
Okay. Next one, I received an invitation ETA for permanent residence under CEC in April 2023, and I have already submitted an EAPR. Will switching my full-time job now after submitting an EAPR affect my application?
In most instances, no. In most instances, it's fine to switch jobs. But it does depend on the specifics of your application. And so I can't give, I mean, again, we would want to sit down and go through your specific situation where I could actually advise you. Yeah.
Fantastic. So for those looking for consultation, we've put Zia's email in the chat function. Please reach out. Next one, my express entry has been in processing for over 1 year and 8 months. Since September 2021. I have already submitted my medical, all documents in time, but the last communication I received was July 2022, asking for an update on my address, something I submitted the next day. In my case, an exception, or is my case an exception, or are all express entry applications very delayed?
Yeah, this is a great question. We're finding that a lot of applications that were submitted during COVID are taking a lot longer to process. I know IRCC right now is trying to decrease processing times as much as possible. And so newer applications, it feels like newer applications are getting processed sooner for whatever reason. But there's no steadfast rule to say, okay, if you submit it on this date, you're going to get something, a decision faster, or it's going to take longer. A lot of the processing time does depend on how complicated, or if there's anything in particular that's problematic with your application. The other part that we're seeing right now is that if you've resided in certain countries, because those countries right now are facing longer times in terms of getting background checks, which are done by third parties, it does become quite a bit longer to get
Okay.
decisions on those particular applications.
So just be a little bit more patient, even though it's quite long, but just be more patient with the process. Hello, my question is that I have a family here, so can I apply a family work permit with my postgraduate work? Actually, I did it. I applied on May 21st, but didn't receive a letter. How long does it take? I'm not too sure what the question is. I have my family here, so I
So
apply.
I'm assuming
Yeah.
here we're talking about applying for the open spousal work permit or for extensions for their children. That's fine. Generally, yes, you can apply for them. We've talked about some of the eligibility criteria in terms of applying for an open spousal work permit. In terms of letters, so I'm assuming what you're talking about is the acknowledgement of receipt from IRCC. Generally, those do come between at around the 20, like within the first 24 hours. With that being said, of course, there are always exceptions and sometimes it does take longer. But yes, you should see that in the online portal.
Okay. Another guest writes, after I got my postgraduate work permit, we sent my husband's open work permit extension application right before the expiration of his previous work permit and got an implied status for his open work permit, which gave him 3 more months to work while waiting for the decision. I'm wondering, while he is waiting for the decision, can he withdraw that work permit application and then I send an application for his stay as a visitor instead? Does this visitor stay permit allow him to stay all year long with me in Canada?
Okay, this is a great question. So this is a common problem that we see. When you submit a work permit extension application, automatically IRCC sends out a letter that their thought process behind it was that we're going to provide this letter, which gives applicants proof that they can provide to their employers that they're able to continue working in Canada while they're waiting for a decision on the extension application. So the thought behind it was that, it'll provide additional proof for employers so that, people who are here waiting for a decision on their applications are actually able to continue working. But what's important to understand here is that that letter in itself does not grant you the ability to work. Okay, as long as you file an extension application on time, right? So before the expiry date of your current status, you hold implied status or maintain status until a decision is made on that extension application, so long as you remain in Canada. Okay, now automatically the letter that this person is speaking about that you get in your portal when you submit that extension application, it automatically is set to have an expiry, like to have the expiry date listed there as 120 days from your application date. Right now, processing times are much longer than that. So it's very confusing. I know a lot of people ask this question that, well, I get this letter, it says that I can only work for the next 120 days, but the processing time is another 4, 5, 6 months. What do I do, right? Do I have to stop working? And the answer is no. As long as you're here in Canada, you do not need to stop working. You can continue working the same way you have been. Maintain status does not end with that arbitrary date that's listed on the letter that IRCC's provided. And so generally, that's usually the reason that people come to me and say, hey, I need to file a visitor application, for example, because I'm going to be out of status. And that's just incorrect. You can be here,
okay.
You can continue working, you can disregard the random date that's on the letter. And again, this is assuming that you've applied properly and you're still waiting for a decision on the extension application.
Okay, great. Good news for the husband. Okay. Can you also talk about the RNIP and the process and requirement for the same to be eligible for the same?
Sure. So the RNIP is the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot. Basically, there are participating communities that are part of this pilot program. For example, Sault Marie, I think I was talking about earlier, is a part of the RNIP program. Now, in terms of the requirements, you either need to have a year of qualifying work experience, or you've graduated from an eligible study program. When we're talking about eligible programs, it needs to be at least 2 years in length, where you've spent 18 months at minimum in the community, and you're applying within 18 months of graduating. This program also does require that you have a qualifying job offer in the community, that you meet language benchmarks, and either you are here working in Canada, or you meet the settlement funds requirement. But it is very much a process that does require the participation of your employer, and that employer does have to be a part of the community that you're applying through.
Okay, good to know. If my study permit is rejected twice from my home country's embassy, will applying from the US as an F1 student currently enrolled in a US university affect my chances positively if I apply a third time?
It completely depends. It completely depends on the reasons for the refusal and what the concerns were with the application. What I would recommend is contact us. We can schedule a consultation appointment and look at what the reasons were for refusal and what the options are in terms of next steps.
Absolutely. Another candidate, I applied for my postgraduate work permit and my husband is in Canada. He came on a spouse open work permit. I want to ask, should we apply our son's file for visitor visa or study visa? My son is 5.5 years old.
Yeah, generally for children that are 5 or over, we're looking at applying for the study visa, the study permit.
Study. Okay, great. I like the easy one. Okay. Do I need to have a job that matches my field of study to get a PR?
Totally depends on the program that you're applying through. If you're looking at Canadian Experience class, for example, then no, your job doesn't have to be in line with what you studied here in Canada.
Okay, great. I've worked in admin management category, but I wish to do a course in caregiver in Canada. Will it be an issue when I apply for a PR due to the career change?
Again, it just depends on what you're applying for, right? What program you're looking to apply for your permanent residence is one of the requirements that your program of study is in line with your work experience or not. If it's not, then no, it doesn't really matter. If it is, then yes, of course, it would have a bit of an issue.
Okay. I'm an international student. My husband is on the open work permit. The company he's working for right now is willing to provide him with an LMIA. However, I checked and his occupation is under tier 4. Is there a chance for him to be approved for a work permit?
Yes, there is still a chance for it. Like, you can still get an LMIA for a low skilled position. You can still get a work permit for a low skilled position. That's fine. But if your husband already has an open work permit, then the question becomes, well, what are you trying to get the LMIA in the new work permit for? Assuming you're using that for permanent residence, then the question isn't, can you get a work permit? The question is this going to help you with permanent residence or not? Generally, a lot of the programs do require a high-skilled job offer or high-skilled work experience. So in that case, if you are looking at a low-skilled position, it may limit, or you may not have options for permanent residence. It just depends.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, consultation for sure.
There you go.
That'll be for most of the questions, I think, as well. So unique to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I am a family of 6. I have 4 children, and I'm on a steady status with my children. My husband is on a visitor visa and is looking to extend with us, as I have extended due to my co-op. Can my husband visitor visa be approved for a longer duration? He initially got approved for 1 year as mine, unlike what we've seen for other spouses on visitor visa.
I mean, is it possible? Yes. It's all about the application that you prepare and submit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just also looking at time, and we still have 13 questions. Zia, I want to make sure that I respect your time as well too. So how many do you think we can do? Maybe 3 more, or?
Sure.
I guess
Yeah,
last three more? Okay, so the next three. So I apologize for the rest of the other questions that come in, but again, please, you have Zia's email and reach out for a consultation. So next three, is it hard to score points for undergrad student in a Bachelor's of Science, Computer Science major in both Express Entry and PNP? So is it hard to score points?
Yeah, so I mean, when you're talking about Express Entry, they're not really looking at your major, right? Express Entry is just looking at, okay, do you have you completed education? Really, that's the question that they're asking. P&P programs are a little different because it just, again, depends on the province and the specific process. If we're looking at Ontario, for example, if you're applying through one of the employer job offer streams, then yes, you are also looking at points for not just the credential that you've completed, but also what was your area of study. So there's not a general answer, unfortunately, for that question, because it does really depend on the actual process that you're applying for permanent residence through.
Right, consultation.
There you go.
Next question. Can PG postgraduate work permit holder fulfill the job requirement that is needed for a spouse's open work permit application if he or she established his or her own company and pay herself salary? Can a work per
Yeah, so if they're self-employed, technically, sure, it could. Now, with that being said, certainly I think if you are self-employed, it's going to invite a higher level of scrutiny as to, is this a genuine position, or is this something that was just put together for the purposes of your spouse qualifying for an open spousal work permit? So I think it really will increase what you need to put into an application, but certainly there's nothing outright prohibiting someone who's self-employed from being able to apply for their spouse's open work permit.
Okay. Last question, but not the last question. Which provinces are favorable for CS? I guess it's CS is computer science major students for PNP, provincial nominee, and also where to find all of the details for PNP programs.
Yeah, so in terms of details for PNP programs, certainly they can all be found online. Every province does have their own websites and does really detail the processes of applying. In terms of which provinces are specifically tailored to computer science, I mean, you would have to take a look to see what the specific requirements are, because it's not just generally about the education. Usually when you're looking at the processes and what is advantageous for provincial programs, a lot of it is based on where you have work experience. So having completed a computer science degree doesn't necessarily put you in a better position. But I mean, then if you're using that to then work as a software programmer, for example, tech-based occupations, there are many different routes for tech-based occupation for people with experience in tech-based occupations. And so that certainly does have an advantage for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great. With that, thank you very much, Zia, for all of this information today. I know we sort of gone through so many questions today. The audience, before we end, I do have a quick poll for you. Please take some time to just answer this quick question. Give us some feedback. Be very much appreciated. Thank you again, Zia, for a wonderful session. And there will be another immigration Q&A session in the next month or so. So please check out that, and we'll be back. Thank you, Zia.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night. Take care. Bye.